Okay, we're talking about, or the title, I don't know if anyone noticed it, but the title is, You Have to Be Present to Win. And that's really why I thought so many people came, because it says win. And I thought, oh boy, I get to win something. Because Unitarians don't usually get to win anything. You know, if you're Jewish, you get to win, you know, the promised land and the one true revelation from God. If you're Christian, in a conventional sense, you get to win eternal life. What do Unitarians get to win? just the knowledge that you're smarter than everyone. Hold up the forgiveness. So I want to talk to you about this notion of being present in order to win. And I'll define present, and I'll define win, but I want to take what we're going to talk about from the Bible. So I need to tell you what I think about the Bible first. For me, the Bible is literature. And I imagine for most of you, it's that at best. Right? If you take the Bible literally, the Bible either becomes the Word of God and it hovers over you sort of judgmentally, or if you take it literally, it becomes just absolute nonsense and you just put it on the bottom of the shelf if you bother holding on to it at all, and you scoff at it. But if you don't take it literally, if you take it as metaphor, if you take it as literature, if you believe that the Bible, which I do, is written by people, mostly men, maybe only men. There's some debate about that, about early stories in Genesis maybe being written by women, but mostly men anyway. It's a human document. It's not a divine document. It's not the revealed word of God. God doesn't write books. Or if God does, I hope he has a better agent than I do. But God doesn't write books. God doesn't dabble in real estate. God doesn't choose one people over another, save or damn, or any of the things that we invent are God's to do for us. God in the Bible is a character, just like Harry Potter in the Harry Potter books.
Oh.
You better get 2 copies of the Forgiveness. I hope I didn't hurt your feelings about that, but it's simply true. God is a character in the Bible, and whoever wrote whatever books in the Bible you're looking at, whoever wrote the story with God in it, oftentimes uses God to say things that the author considers incredibly important. I mean, God's voice is the dominant voice in the text. In the Hebrew Bible, when you get to the New Testament, it's Jesus, who many believe is also God. But it's the same thing. I mean, the New Testament authors wrote decades after Jesus had died, and in my humble opinion, though I didn't write a book on humility still, I can use the phrase, in my not so humble opinion, I think they simply put words in Jesus' mouth in order to get their own thoughts across. Now that is sometimes offensive, depending on what they say and what you believe, but sometimes it's brilliant. In other words, the God character in the stories can carry truths that, if we can investigate them as literature, can be very deep. So this is a study of a text in the Bible that I do not take as divine, but I still take as very important. So in the opening, actually anywhere in the book of Genesis in the first chapter, God talks at people. Right? God creates people in Genesis 1:26, or he says he's going to do it in 26, he does it in 27, and then he commands them. The people are mute. God just talks at them. The word for God in that story is the generic Elohim. It just means God in some abstract, it has no personality. And God says, be fruitful and multiply, and by the way, you can eat whatever you want as long as it's vegan, except from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that's basically what God has to say. It's just commandments. In the second chapter of Genesis, we get a God with a personality, and the name changes. That's where you get the word Yahweh. The name for God is Yahweh, and that's a specific God. And it says, Yahweh Elohim, the God Yahweh. In most English Bibles, it'll say the Lord God, but that's not a translation. That's just a substitution for the actual word Yahweh. So you get this character, Yahweh, who is identified in the Bible as God, and that character has personality. And that character actually speaks to the humans and expects a response. Whereas the first one is talking at us, the second one is trying to have a conversation with us. And the first thing that God says in chapter 2 of the Bible to the humans is, where are you? It's a question. In my mind, when I read it, it's a koan. You know those the Zen puzzles? Those of you who go to the Zen practice I'm assuming it's practice, on Wednesday night. I don't know if you ever do koan work, but I spent 10 years not understanding koan with a Zen master who made it very clear, you do not understand koan. But I think that there are koan throughout, I don't mean koans, a lot of koans in the Bible. Koans in the Bible, and they're usually questions that are posed to the characters. But because I think it's literature, and I think it's sometimes great literature, I take these questions as posed to humanity. That Adam and Eve stand for humanity, Abraham and Sarah stand for humanity. So when God speaks to them, God speaks to us, meaning that the author of the text is speaking to us through the character of God that is used in the story. So the first thing that God says to humanity, by way of speaking with us rather than at us, is, where are you? Now you know the story. They were created, they were naked and unashamed, and then they ate from the tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then they saw that they were naked and they were ashamed, and then they hid when they heard God coming, and then God says, where are you? I want to take a close look at the notion that what it might have been, I'm going to read this into it, but what might have been in the author's mind. Why make God's first contact with humans on a more personable basis? Why make it the form of a question, where are you? So, rabbis have been asking this forever, and they usually say, well, first of all, God must know where they are because God is omniscient. So I'm not making a claim for God. In the context of the story, you would imagine that God is omniscient, so God would know. And if that's the case, then the author knows that the reader would know that God is omniscient. So the purpose of the question is not to get information for God, but to pose some kind of existential challenge to us. Right? You follow that? And the response that Adam gives, anyone know? What he says? He says, I was hiding because I was ashamed, because we had eaten from the tree of knowledge. Shame drove him into hiding. I don't want to go into this tangent, but let me just, because I've done it before, but let me just make it clear to you that once that question is asked, the story just focuses on the man and God, and not the woman. And if you look at the story carefully, not just in the Hebrew, but even in the English, it's the man who's ashamed, not the woman. It's the man who is kicked out of the garden, and not the woman. There's a whole subtext there that needs to be explored, and I've written about it, and I've talked about it here, so I won't do it again. But given the fact, I'm just letting you know, I know that, but that's not what we're talking about. I'm going to say the question, despite the way that the book is written, the story is written, the question is for men and women. The question is for humanity as individuals. Each one of us is asked by reality, where are you? And our answer is always the same. I was hiding. And so the next question you have to ask, not asked in the book, but the next question you have to ask is, why was I hiding? And then where was I hiding? So there's three questions. Where are you? I was hiding. Why? I don't know. And where is probably the biggest question of the three. Once you recognize you're hiding, why is less important to me than where. So in the story, the reason why is they were ashamed. They suddenly knew they were naked, and they were suddenly ashamed. They knew they were naked already, and they weren't ashamed. Maybe the eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil came with a subscription to Cosmo, and they go, oh my God, I don't look anything like that. Esquire magazine, oh, that's not me, and they were ashamed, they were embarrassed. But then the answer would have been, oh, I was at the gym because I was ashamed and I wasn't working out because I wanted to get ripped. So what causes their shame? Traditionally you say, oh, because their shame was over their guilt from having eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But guilt doesn't necessarily imply shame. Shame is something else. So as I read the story, what Adam reveals about humanity is that we have just enough knowledge to be separated from the world, and that separation causes us to feel, I don't know if shame is the right word, but to feel less than we are. And we try to hide from that. I don't know if that makes sense to you. I don't know how clear I'm saying it. But when you look at later in the story when God is talking to the angels, you assume, and God says, now that the man, because it literally is talking about this one individual, now that the man has become achad mimenu, most Bibles will say, now that the man has become like one of us. But achad doesn't mean that. If the Bible were to say, the guy has become like one of us, it would say, ke'echad mimenu, like one of us. Echad is one. But it's achad, which means the human has become distinct from us, separate from us, alienated from us. And in many commentaries, the us isn't God talking to angels, because angels aren't mentioned. It's God talking to nature and saying now they have just enough knowledge to be out of sync, to be disconnected, alienated. And that is our problem. And because we're alienated, we try to hide, because our alienation makes us feel incredibly fragile. Now, we are, in a sense, fragile. I mean, just sharing people's concerns, as well as joys, I guess, but concerns certainly. I mean, you can be perfectly healthy, and then bam, something happens to you, and you're no longer healthy. Your body just gives out. Your mind gives out. And there's no escape from that, ultimately. So we are fragile. But when we feel disconnected, our natural fragility gives rise to a level of fear that is emotionally, spiritually, philosophically, psychologically debilitating. When I no longer feel connected to you, and I no longer feel connected to the larger animal world and the larger world of nature and the cosmos and all of that, when I no longer have that connection, I'm really afraid, because it seems like I could be snuffed out in any second. Without, see if I can get it this way. Twice, at least twice, maybe I missed a third time, but at least twice during Joys and Concerns, people who had, we're talking about people who had passed, who had died, or people who are sick, saying they miss coming here, they love the support, and they miss coming here because of the support. That's what's missing when you're out of sync. You can't get support, you can't connect. And so, even though we're fragile with support, we're fragile and alone, and hence maybe more existentially troubled by the fragility when we are alone. Stop me for a second. Let me stop for a second. Is that clear what I'm saying? Anyone lost besides me? Okay. So, the import of the question in Genesis 2, Genesis 3 actually, the import of the question is calling us, is that the author of the story is saying that there are moments when you are called, you're given this opportunity, there are moments when we are called to come out of hiding, to stop feeling disconnected and alienated, to come out and to respond to the world, even if we're afraid, even if we're ashamed, to simply come out of hiding. Now, Adam just comes out and then says, I was afraid. But later, because this question, where are you, happens all the time. And it's either literally, where are you in the Bible, or God just calls your name, like, Moses, and then you're supposed to step out wherever you are, and you're present. The way most of the other characters in the Hebrew Bible respond when that happens to them is with this phrase, this word, hineni. Hineni means here I am. And the idea is not hineni doesn't mean a geographical location. If you're in class, in a classroom, and they're calling out names in Hebrew, and they call out your name, Rami, and I would go, Ani po, or Ani kan. I'm here in the classroom. But that's not hineni. Hineni is I'm present to whatever it is you're about to present me with. It's the presentness in Thich Nhat Hanh's sense of presentness. It's that kind of being open and response able to whatever the universe is about to present. So what the story is saying is the universe does, in fact, periodically call us in this way. And then do we have, this is I think implicit in the story, do we have the courage to come out and say, Hineni? No excuses, I was afraid, I was this. All of that's a given maybe. But regardless, I'm not going to change my feelings, I don't even know how to do that. But to simply step out with fear, without fear, with anxiety, shame, whatever it happens to be, and simply say, Hineni, here I am. My total messy self, here I am. To be present to whatever the universe is presenting to me or asking of me at that moment. Now I want to introduce, I don't want to take credit for the next part, so I'm going to introduce this book. This is one of the most important books I've ever read in my entire life. And I did read it probably because this is how thick it is. I like books that basically are a collection of tweets. But this book was written by Martin Buber in 1963. So it's, someone do the math. Everyone here from the science people, of course, do the math. I gotta get out my phone, calculate it. How many, what is it? 52 years ago. So half a century ago, Buber wrote this book. And it's called The Way of Man, According to the Teachings of Hasidism. Now, if he wrote the book today, he'd change the title. You know, it'd be The Way of Humans, you know, but back then we just have to give them the limitations of the language of the time. But The Way of Man, According to the Teachings of Hasidism. It's a little bit of a misnomer. It's the way of humanity, according to Martin Buber, who uses the teachings of Hasidism, Jewish mysticism, to make his point. But I'm not going to make a claim that Hasidism itself teaches any of this. This is Buber. So Buber takes this story where God is calling us, saying, you know, where are you? And here's what he says. God does not expect to learn something by asking this question. God does not expect to learn something he doesn't know. What he wants is to produce an effect in us which can only be produced by just such a question, provided that it reaches our heart, that we are allowed, that we allow it to reach our heart. So you could be blocked, and that's what he's going to call hiding. So you don't notice the universe is asking you to be present. But assuming you let that happen, it produces an effect in us, an effect of being present. So let me just read a little bit more. Adam hides himself to avoid rendering accounts, to escape responsibility for his way of living. Every person hides for this purpose. For every person is Adam and finds himself in Adam's situation. To escape responsibility for your life, you turn existence into a system of hideouts. Say that again. To escape responsibility for the way we live, we turn our existence into a series of hideouts. Places where we don't have to confront the madness of the way we live. And we don't have to come out of that, and we don't have to be present, because we take that madness as, you know, reality. I'm going to put it in quotes, but it's our reality. And we live that out without even considering the possibility that it's just a hideout. And in thus hiding again and again from the face of God, he has that in quotes, we enmesh ourselves more and more deeply in perversity. A new situation thus arises, which becomes more and more questionable with every day, with every new hideout. This situation can be precisely defined as follows. You cannot escape the eye of God, but in trying to hide from God, you are hiding from yourself. True, in you there too is something that's seeking God, but you make it harder and harder for that something to find you. This question is designed to awaken you and destroy your system of hideouts. It's to show you that to what state you have come, and to awake in you the great will to get out of it. So let me unpack this for a second. So we become habituated to hiding. Where do we hide? So we hide in psychology and sociology, in ideologies of any kind, in any kind of ism. You know, I hide in being a Jew. I hide in being Caucasian. I hide in being an American. You know, these are all systems of thought imposed on my truest self allowing me to think a certain way, to act a certain way without having to think about what I'm doing at all. Just, this is just sort of ingrained in my head. And to step out of that is what Buber is calling us to do. Buber is they call him a religious humanist. He's somewhat of a spiritual anarchist. He rejects as binding the commandments of the Bible upon the Jews. He thinks that commandments are commanded in the moment by the life calling you to step out of hiding. When you step out of hiding, there's a command. You're needed. Right? Remember the old Avengers, the original Avengers TV show? And Steele would always call Mrs. Steed and say, Mrs. Steed, Mrs. Peel, we're needed. Right? So life is one big steed calling you, by your name and saying, you're needed. But we don't want to be needed. We want to just go about doing the things that we normally do because that's what gives us joy. That's what gives us whatever it gives us. But we don't want to come out of that because when we come out of that, then we are naked because we've been wearing all the clothes of all these different trappings. We are naked, and sometimes that naked frightens us so much that we don't want to face it. We want to go back. Now, I don't know why. And I guess I would have written the story differently with this in mind. I don't know why that nakedness would make me ashamed. I think it would make me feel liberated. I think the shame is that I'm hiding, and that I'm hiding behind all these isms, which I now know, and so do you, because I just told you, are simply coverings of your true self. And that if you say, well, I've never been called to step out of my stories, to step out of my labels, to step out of my conditioning, that's only because you're really well hidden. So what he's saying is that, well, actually, let me just read you the next thing. At every, well, I'll just paraphrase it because it's a little bit long. But at every moment, the still small voice is what he calls it, is calling to you, saying, where are you? You're needed. Can you respond hineni? Can you step out and do whatever's being asked of you? To do that, though, you can't step out as a male or as a female or as a Unitarian or as a Christian or as a Jew or as any label thing. You can't step out as a liberal or a conservative. You have to step out as a naked human being and just say, here I am. With all my stuff, with all my foibles, with all that, but not with all my labels. I'm not going to step out and say, oh, I can't do that because I'm a X. You step out naked without those hideouts, and then, you can refuse to do what life asks you to do, but you can't pretend that you're not being asked and that you can't, if you wanted to, respond. So this is how he opens this book, and this is how the Bible opens as well. The first time God speaks to us as a person, face to face, not face to face, but intending for a conversation, intending a response, as opposed to just commanding us. The first time that happens, God says, where are you? So we have got to learn to step out and be present. So then Buber goes on, and he says, okay, how do you do it? And he tells a story. This is an actual Hasidic story. Hasidic stories are usually very short, koan-like events. So this one, I'll just read it to you. It's a sentence, 2 sentences. It says, Rabbi Bear of Radishitz. I don't know why anyone would admit to being in a place called Radishitz, but okay. Rabbi Bear of Radishitz once said to his teacher, the seer of Lublin, another famous rabbi, show me one general way to serve God. Now, in the context of this book, show me one way that everybody can just come out of hiding. And the rabbi replies, it's impossible to tell you what way you should take. For one way to serve God, or one way to respond to reality, is through learning, another through prayer, another through fasting, another through eating. Every person should carefully observe what way her heart draws her to, and then choose this way with all your strength. You come into the world with a way, but it's your way. Right? It's not the way of a system. It's not the way of any formal practice necessarily that someone else has invented and that you're supposed to follow. It's just your way. Are you familiar with Kafka's story called The Law? It's a brilliant little parable that he sticks in the middle of, I think it's the trial, but I could be wrong with that. In the story that Kafka writes, there's the seeker of the truth, basically. He calls it the law. The seeker of revelation, the seeker of truth. And he spends his life seeking, and he finally finds the doorway to the truth. But the doorway is guarded by this giant warrior guard. And he goes up to the guard and says, can I pass? And the guard says, you can do whatever you want, but I just want to tell you, as big and as terrifying as I am, there's another guard inside, and another guard after that, another guard after that, and each one is bigger and more terrifying than the one before. So the guy is intimidated, he doesn't go in. And the story goes on, and I'll just make it a sentence, and basically he spends his entire life in front of the truth, the door to the truth, and he does everything he can to bribe the guard to let him come in. He gives him all of his possessions, everything. And finally, at the end of the story, he's at the end of his life, and he's dying, and he can't do anything anymore. He's just lying on this sort of a makeshift bed, because he's built a little house for himself out in front of the doorway. And he's at his last breath, and he calls the guard over to him. And the guard bends down and puts his ear next to the guy's mouth. And the guy says, I have spent my entire life here at the door in front of the truth. How come no one else has ever been able to find this door? And the guard says, you don't understand. This is your door. No one else found this door because this door is only for you to find. And it's only you that can walk through it. And all you had to do was walk through it. I never stopped you. He says, you gave me everything, and I took it just so you wouldn't think that you were holding anything back. But I never said, don't go. I told you that there were other guards, but I never said they would stop you. You just didn't go. And now you're dying. And now I'm going to close the door. And he closes the door, the guy dies. So Buber is saying something very similar. There is no, or the Hasidim, as Buber understands it, are saying something very similar. There is no way that someone else can give you to get into your door. The door is always where you are, and the way is always the way that you are intrinsically drawn to. So Buber says, using the seer of Lublin as his mouthpiece, Buber is saying you have to carefully observe what way you're drawn to, and then go for that with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul. But we don't necessarily know what that way is. We've been hiding so long, so afraid to come out and then maybe enter that door, so afraid to respond to life and enter into the truth, that we don't even recognize that we have a way. Instead, we create, or we follow other people's creations, hideouts, and we give them very important names. Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, paganism, anything that ends with an ISM is another hideout from this point of view. And it's only when you step out of the whole thing that you step into that doorway and you say hineni to whatever the truth is. But there is no way to do it, no generic way to do it, it's just your way to do it. And one of the problems that people have is, I think, that their way is so unlike other people's ways that they are ashamed to follow their way. They're afraid, this can't be right, no one else is doing it. But that's the whole point. No one else can do it, it's your way. So, one more piece from Buber. Every person is born into this world. This is how he concludes this little story. Every person born into this world represents something new, something that never existed before, something original and unique. Every person born into this world represents something new, something that never existed before, something original and unique. It's the duty of every person to know and consider that he is unique in the world in his particular character, and that there has never been anyone like him in the world, for if there had been someone like him, there would have been no need for him to be in the world. Nobody is redundant. Each person is absolutely unique, and that's why you're here. You are a unique expression of the divine or of nature, however you want to understand it, but you're a unique expression of this reality. In order to express that reality's unus, right? Because that, for me, and this is now my riff on Buber, I look at the universe Whether I call it nature, I call it God, doesn't really make a difference. But I look at reality, and I see reality manifesting in unique ways in everything that exists. So, there's reality or God or nature dugging, right? I mean, that's because this is it Ramiing. And it only Ramis once, for a bit, as me. Someone else may have the same name, but the Ramiing is different. And what Buber is calling us to do, and what he's saying God is calling us to do, and what the Bible's calling us to do, and what the Hasidim are calling us to do, is to find that, to recognize, understand, and live from your own uniqueness, because that's why you were born. So if the universe is calling to us, where are you? To step out of hiding, to be confronted by whatever it is that needs to be done. Whatever it is that needs to be done can only be done by you. That's the message. And that's so frightening that we stay hidden. Because that's too much. That's too much. There has to be somebody else. And you see, when Moses is called to liberate the Israelites, he says, no, I can't do that. It's got to be somebody else. When Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane is supposed to go and die on the cross, he has to take this cup from me. There's got to be somebody else that can do this. In the end, and I love that about those stories, because it shows their humanness. They want to go, I'd rather hide. But then they don't. It's not that God says, no, you can't. God never says anything to Jesus. Jesus goes, take this cup from me. Okay, then you didn't, so now I guess I'll just have to carry it myself. So it's these individuals in their stories wrestling with the same thing that you and I are wrestling with, but making a conscious, willful effort to step out of hiding and to do whatever it is that has to be done. So in Moses' case, to liberate the people, and in Jesus' case, in a sense, to liberate them through his own death and resurrection. As the stories progress. But at that moment, they can't be certain of anything, but they still come out of hiding, and they still say, in their own way, Hineni, here I am. And they're present to whatever life asks. So here's the homework. If it's true, if you don't buy the fact that every person born into this world represents something new, something that never existed before, something original and unique, then forget it. Right? If you're redundant, well, let the other guy deal with it. Right? Find out who is your doppelganger and say, oh, you mean that guy. Go talk to her. So, but if you do believe this, if this strikes a chord in you, I am a unique manifestation of this absolute reality. If that is true, then how can I hide anywhere successfully? Because I'm not going to fit anywhere. I'm a terrible Jew. I don't really fit because I don't buy the whole story. If you realize your own uniqueness, then you feel alienated even from your hideouts. Nowhere gives you comfort. Nowhere provides safety, because you don't feel appropriate to anything or any place, because you're not in the one place you have to be, which is here, responding to life as life presents itself to you in the only way that you can, knowing that that's the only way that life needs at that moment from you. That's the challenge. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, and this is homework, where are you hiding? Let's just assume you're hiding. I'm going to assume that you're hiding. If you say you're not hiding, you guys are really well hidden. So it's like going to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and saying, I'm not an alcoholic. They don't take that at face value. They just say, you're in denial. I know, I tried it. They just say, no, you're in denial. And even though I wasn't an alcoholic, I was just trying to pass, they didn't take my word for it. They said, no, you're in denial. So I'm saying the same thing. If you're sitting here and saying, I'm not hiding, I think you're in denial. I think we're all hiding. So the question isn't, am I hiding? The question is, where am I hiding? And maybe you have to ask people who know you, but you have to really trust them. You have to trust them to know. You have to trust them not to project their own hiding onto you. And you have to trust them to tell you where you're hiding with all possible compassion, so that when you get really mad at them for telling you, they'll recognize they actually were right. So where are you hiding? And then, you might have to, this is more of an imaginal thing. What might the universe be calling me to do if I weren't hiding? What might it mean to step out of my hiding place and say, Hineni, here I am? What might be asked of me? And why does that scare me so much that I'm afraid to see if it's true? Once you've got that down according to Buber and according to Hasidim, and I think it's true. Once you've broken the code to know you're hiding and to know where you're hiding and to know maybe what you're hiding from, you can no longer hide. It's just not doable. Even when you continue to tell yourself the same story, put on the same labels over and over again, now you know their stories, and now you know their labels, and it's really much more difficult to get away with it. You can't fool yourself as much. I do this program called Holy Rascal Revivals, because a holy rascal is someone who calls you out of hiding and makes it impossible for you to hide. And in this, the first thing you do when you come in to get a name tag, like the hello, my name is, except instead of being those little 3-inch by 2-inch cards, ours are 2 feet across and 3 feet long. And they're on thick pieces of cord, and they're blank. And the first exercise is you take the giant name tag and you write your story on it. Not in full sentences, just all these things. Oh, I'm this, I'm that. All the things that you tell people whenever you're in a situation like that, when you're being introduced or you're introducing yourself to someone, all the things you want them to know about you. So you put your whole story on the front of the card. And then you wander around and people, they read your card, they get introduced. The second part of the exercise, you flip it over and you write all the things about you don't want anyone to know. And then the whole idea for the whole day-long workshop is, can you free yourself from that card? And in the end, we fold them up and we don't burn them in the beginning. They're there if you need it. Some people can't leave without their card. Not because they're afraid I'm going to go and look at it and go, oh my God. No one reads the back side. But because they just can't live without their hideouts. But many people will just leave them there and then we burn them. So that they're just gone. But once you've done the exercise, even if you take the card home, what we found in feedback later on is that once you know you're hiding, the hideout doesn't work. And that's what Buber is calling us to, that's what the Bible is calling us to break our system of hideouts and see where that takes us. And I'll suggest to you it takes you beyond the guard, through the doorway of truth, into reality that you can respond in your own unique way, the way the universe needs. Hineni, here I am. So I'm going to stop with that. We can go more into it during talkback. Thank you very much.